There we go. It's better. Hello, and welcome to another day of animation fun. Respect. You're too tired. Yeah. What are you doing up at this hour? It's always funny to say, well, I'm too tired. This isn't working out for me. I'm not going to do this anymore. But I'm still here. I'm back. Anyway, well, welcome. Welcome to another day of animation fun, or evening, or morning, depending on where you're at. For those of you who haven't slept yet, good morning, good evening. It's late, it's early. Hey, when you're an international person, as I like to think of myself as, there is no such thing as night or day. It's all good. So yeah, welcome to some animation fun. Been away for a bit, but I'm back, and today I'm going to be talking about a scene that I've been working on for a while, and I've actually finished it. But I'm going to be working through the final stages of this scene and showing just how I've done it. This was a scene that I started before Halloween, so it has sort of a Halloween theme, but because of one thing or another, I was not able to finish it before Halloween. But I wanted to show a final scene, final end result of a scene, and say, hey, look, this is how it looks when it's all cleaned up and sparkly. So I'm going to leave you in anticipation as to all that and talk a little bit about the scene for a little bit before I actually show it. So hang on for Rushback. Well, get some sleep. You're not going to miss anything. But if anybody else is interested, I'm going to talk about review what the assignment was, what the project was, what I was trying to accomplish, what my influences were, where I got to the place I am at now with the project, and then show you the final result. And then I'm going to be doing some inking and painting today and applying things like tones and highlights in the 2D world using Toon Boom. Sorry, Rushback, it's funny. Yeah, get some sleep. But anyway, so anybody who's interested, today will be a little bit more about the technical side of Toon Boom and how you can use it to ink and paint things very quickly and easily. And I really like that about this program and other digital programs. Oh yeah, somebody asked, who's the who's the purple guy? Yeah, I don't know. It just showed up. It exists. That's all I can say. I've had people offer it up names. Nothing is actually stuck. I've gotten some really good names for it, and but yet nothing is stuck with it yet. There's no definitive name. We've gotten Barney, we've gotten Chloe, and then there was a great one. I can't remember what the name was, but it was something really exotic and gothic. So it's up to you. You can tell me what it is. Anyway, but what it is it's something that I actually just drew and threw together so I could have a companion sitting here. I had another friend visit for Halloween, and then there's one that's waiting in the wings for the holiday season, Santa Claus, that's going to show up, which is appropriate because my name is Scott Claus, aka S Claus, ha ha ha, and that means that you should be nice to me if you believe in Santa and you want presents this year. So anyway, hopefully you guys can see and hear okay. Sounds like so far that's not a problem. And if it is a problem, just let me know. The way it goes is, if you're new to this, I'm going to be working on a scene. I'm going to, like, as I said a minute ago, I'll set it up. I'll show you where I'm at with it and what I intend to do with it. I'm actually going to show you how the thing ends up, so you can kind of get a sneak preview of how it's all going to look in just a minute here, and then I'm just going to jump in and start working. And so while I'm doing that, please feel free to chime in with the chat and ask questions, bring up topics that you're interested in. I'm happy to talk about all sorts of things, specifically animation, 2D animation related. That's kind of the goal of tonight, but I'm also a CG animator. I've done character work, creature effects work. I've done a lot of stuff with live action animation hybrid. Worked at Disney, worked at DreamWorks. Please feel free to look up my profile on imdb.com, Scott Claus, imdb.com, if you want to see the movies I've worked on. I'm happy to talk about them to whatever extent I'm allowed to without NDA, non-disclosure agreements that I've signed. I can't talk about some things, but anybody who's ever dropped in before knows that I'm pretty vocal about the projects I worked on. And then I also like to talk to you guys about, businessy stuff. What's it like to work in the entertainment business? What is it? How do I get in, and how do I stay there? And what will I find there? So anything along those lines is fair game as far as if you want to talk about anything tonight. So while I'm working, feel free to chime in, and I will answer questions to the best of my abilities. So right now we've got Boris Johnson. The only thing I'm not going to talk about is politics or religion, but yeah, it's funny. John Skull, hey, how's it going? And hello, hello. Nice to see some familiar faces. And teaches senpai, I don't even know what that is. So let me just get set up here a little bit and make sure that everything is running smoothly on all ends. That means you'll hear me talking to myself a little bit, but I always like to make sure we're on several different platforms. And before we get too into it, I like to just make sure everybody can see and hear on each of the platforms. So that's what I'm doing here at the beginning, and then we'll just dive right in and start looking at stuff. So hope you guys are doing well tonight. Hope you guys are into animation or something along those lines. If you're not, I'm also, like I said, well versed in other things. Yeah, see, there you go. You can hear me. I'm talking twice. Yeah, so shh, be quiet. So if you're into other things, you will find that there are other streams that are allowed, that are available. You can check in on some of the other streams, and if there are other things that you're interested in, and you will find menus for that wherever you signed on to this platform. But we're all over the place. I'm not going to call out individual platforms, but you know what they are. And so feel free to check them out. Okay, looks like everything's up and running. Do I prefer 2D over 3D? No. That's the end. I got to know this famous director. His name was Ken Russell, and they would ask him questions, and he would answer with yes or no answers, and it was just infuriating. He was kind of at the end of his life, and he was kind of, I don't know if he didn't care or if he just was tired or whatever, but they would ask him questions like that. Do you prefer 2D or over 3D? And he would say no. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Is that so? No, I love 2D and 3D for different reasons. I think they're both great. And in the great wars of 1990, the end of, I guess it was the 2000s, when they were trying to decide, well, actually, when the studios were saying, hey, let's just do CG animation and no more 2D, I was one of the people who raised their hands and said, hey, why don't we do both? What's wrong with doing both, or making a hybrid? What's wrong with taking Eastern styles, the anime look, and then Western styles, the more traditional 2D Disney look, or TV, the stuff that you see on TV that's a little more limited. Why don't you mix it all together? It's all good. There's no reason why you can't do everything. And those of you out there who are interested in making a career for yourself as an animation, be the people who are going to lead the way. Show us all the right direction. Come up with projects and show them and make them into big hits or viral sensations, and lead the way and make the kind of projects you guys want. So anyway, just want to check a couple messages here. Oh, teacher senpai. Okay, I got it. Right. Okay, I'll be your teacher. You've just found out that The Rock is your cousin. For real? You guys' number? We'll call him, and we'll check in and make sure, see how he's doing. So just finished with a practice walk cycle again. Well, you can never do enough walk cycles, and once you've done one, you should go and do another one. Look at Richard Williams and all the wonderful walk cycles that he has put into his books and online, and you'll see that there are many, many different ways to do a walk cycle, and you can do them from different angles. Now, my feeling about this, don't quote me on this one. Don't anybody say that I said this. I don't care what you say. But a walk cycle, it's something that you should know how to do, but it's not necessarily something you put on your reel, and it's not something that you might, it's not something you sell yourself as an animator. Sorry, didn't mean to hit you. It's just something that you need to know how to do. And if you don't know how to do it and you do it poorly, they'll point and laugh and go, oh, you don't know how to do it. But if you know how to do it and you can do it with fluency, then they don't really care. You see what I'm saying? It's like if you work and work and work and come up with the best walk cycle that ever existed, the best you'll probably get is, okay, good, you can do a walk cycle, great. But if you can't do one, they'll say, oh, you can't do a walk cycle. You need to go back to Animation 101 and learn. So, short of you really love doing walk cycles, which I think is wonderful if you do, because it's an incredible skill to have. It's like, yeah, you really think in terms of cycles. But short of that, you probably want to put something more dynamic on your reel to try and get a job, which is, oh, I can do acting, I can do action, whatever. So, Danny, 3D, you think I'm a legend, huh? Well, I've worked with a lot of legends. I've worked with Glenn Keane and James Baxter, and Ken Duncan is a pal of mine. He has a studio in Burbank, and he's just signed on a deal to do a bunch of films with Canada. I've had the pleasure of working with some of the best animators in the world, in my humble opinion. I was there when Sergio Paulo was there, but I didn't know him. I didn't meet him. So anyway, yes, I don't know that I would call myself a legend, but thank you. I appreciate the compliment. But I've certainly worked with some of them. Let's see, cousin, you're trying to get in contact. Well, listen, John Skull. Hey, I mean, that's how it works. It's for anybody who's curious. The best way to get into the business is somebody, and that's never ever changed. That's always been the case. So if you know somebody, use whatever resources you have. Just think about this before you ask somebody a favor. Remember my credo, which is schmoozing and networking is not about, hey, you're somebody who's got connections, can you help me? It's, oh, you're somebody who has accomplished something. How can I praise you and become friends with you so that you want to help me when the time comes? You don't ask for favors, you become an inevitability where they will just naturally make a favor out of you. And I've done that several times. People become my friend in the real world, and it just seems a natural fit. It's like, oh, did you know that this place is hiring? You might want to check it out. If I really think you're good, maybe I'll put in a good word for you. But you do all the work, and if you've got what it takes, you'll get it. If you don't, you won't. But nothing I say is going to make a difference. I do not, under any circumstances, say, oh, you need a job. I don't know you, but hey, here, I'll go, hook you up, because then it makes me look bad if it doesn't work out. So it's just something to think about. When you think about networking and schmoozing, it's essential that you know somebody at some point. But knowing somebody can just mean you're a really nice person and people like you, and you have a reputation as a nice person. And so when a job comes up, they think, we'll send you over there because I think you'd be a good fit. So anyways, trying some action animation. Yeah, you might try flattering The Rock. I mean, I've met several people who were famous, and I've never met anybody who didn't succumb to flattery. And so you do something that's sort of a tribute, fan tribute of some kind, and then that's a way to break the ice. So something to think about. But yeah, good luck with that. Come back and tell us how it went. It's interesting. I know a couple guys working in the industry. Your animation is on par. Got told you need more practice. When somebody tells you that you need more practice, it can go one of two ways, because I had the same thing happen. My first gig, my getting into the animation industry was based on a coincidence where I was ready to give up, and somebody said, well, don't give up, even though I had been told in no uncertain terms by somebody that my work stunk and that there was no hope, that I absolutely did not have what it takes. And I was ready to listen to that. And then through a series of funny events, I became friends with that person. And she was my dear friend's mom. And I saw it from her perspective. And in essence, I was wasting her time applying for a job I was not qualified for. And I knew I wasn't qualified. I just thought, well, I'm young, it's magic, maybe I'll get lucky. And there is no luck. Luck is something you make, and you make it because you're at the right place at the right time, because you were ready when the time showed up. So the idea is when somebody tells you that, keep practicing, what they mean is just keep doing what you love and loving what you do. And when the time is right, you'll have a body of stuff that's ready, and you'll meet the right person. And when that happens, that will be the right time in the right place, because you'll have met the right person and you'll have the right amount of work that's exactly what they were looking for. It doesn't necessarily mean, oh, you're not good enough or you're bad or whatever. It just means that you haven't made the right connection yet. So just more thoughts, things to think about. He hung out with Michael Phelps. Oh, that's cool. Well, hey, I mean, my experience with people who are famous is they're not really that much different than everybody else. They just want to have a pleasant time. And the worst thing you can do is overhype somebody. And I mean, you should be respectful, but you shouldn't place somebody so high that they're no longer a human being. The best connections I've had with famous people were eye to eye. And it's like, oh, you're a talent, I'm a talent, you've got something, I got something, we're off on different routes, you're successful, I'm successful in a different way. Those have been the best relationships I've had with people who had names. The worst thing you can do is just be a total geek in the face of somebody who's famous or has done something. It's unless you're at a convention, in which that's what you're there for. So anyway. Any tips on how Glenn Keane got such smoothness to his animation, or is it all experience? Well, consider that Glenn Keane draws with charcoal, and if you've ever looked at his rough animation, he's drawing in really broad swoops, and that goes all the way back to the beginning. The first time I ever saw his work was The Fox and the Hound, so I was probably either in high school or just about to enter high school, and I saw him on a show drawing, and he drew with these big swoopy charcoal lines. And when I was working for him on Pocahontas, we had to, if you look up Pocahontas rough Glenn Keane drawings, you'll see we had to sort through all the lines that he drew and pick out those one. I was a cleanup artist. Pick out the one line that would render Pocahontas's hair the best out of all the lines that he provided with his charcoal sketches. So that's one thing, is the nature of how he thinks and draws is in charcoal. And if you watch that short he did with, was it Kobe? That it's very painterly, it's very charcoal-like, and that's him getting to finally do what he wanted to do all along, which is not be nailed down to those tight, clean lines that we used in the glory days of the Disney and days in the 90s. It was a much more freeing look and feel. If you look at the Colors of the Wind sequence in Pocahontas, I don't know if anybody's even seen that film anymore at the age you guys are, but if you look at that fantasy sequence, that's Glenn Keane having fun. That's what he loves to do. But yeah, he definitely has an eye for that, doesn't he? Yeah, for the smoothness and the flow. That's what he does best. So any tips? Well, use a lot of drawings. Put things on ones. And be a master at arcs. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit with my scene today. Just make sure that you understand what arcs are. And that's what the best animators are all good at, is arcs. If my hand, I'll do it over here so I'm not going to hit my friend. If I go like this, that's an arc, right? And knowing that is what your arc is and not this. Just something as simple as that. And the arcs go this way, and this way, and this way, everything has an arc, and being able to draw the fluidity of an arc, that makes it look smooth. So, a swim meet was fun talking with him. Down to earth guy. Yeah, I know somebody who actually we worked with him, so it wasn't creepy, but he actually found out what church Mr. Keane and his family went to and said, I'm going to go and try and, it is a nice person, so it wasn't creepy. And again, we all worked at Disney together, but it was, my understanding is that outside of Disney, he could be a really cool person. But I can't remember if it was him or it was somebody else who used to go on little drawing safaris and take a bunch of artists with them and go different places, and then they would all draw together. I didn't get to do that because I worked too hard. I didn't have enough time. I actually was working 24/7 for my career. So anyway, but yeah, as you can see, like I said, ask anything, you guys. If I know it, I'll answer it. All right, so I'm going to now move into the work zone and show you a little bit about what I was doing with this. If anybody's come into these streams before, you've probably seen me working on this. I'm going to just set it up a little bit and show you. I started out with the idea of doing a bat kind of in the style of Wally Wood, a famous 1950s Mad magazine artist that I really, really liked. He did these bats with these big eyes, and just he's very dynamic in it, the way he renders things. He was going to actually do animation with Ralph Bakshi, a famous animator. He's still around and still a very scrappy DIY animator that I respect him a lot. And his work got me into animation as much as anything else, Disney and Friends. Anyway, so that influenced my style from way back when I was a kid. So I always have drawn bats. And I was showing, before Halloween, I draw a lot of Halloween cartoons and a lot of just, Halloween themed stuff. But there you go. It's like bats. It's just a thing. It's something I've always drawn, creatures with wings. So yeah, just a quickie to let you guys know where I'm coming from. Here is another example of characters that I animated. I had them dancing in previous streams. If you're really interested, you can see, but just limited stuff, nothing too exciting. But anyway, there's another example of the kind of bat that I might do. And then last but not least, I always talk about this. This was a film that really influenced me when I was a kid in crazy ways. It's called Jack and the Witch. It's really hard to track down. You certainly can't track down the widescreen version, the CinemaScope version, the one that's the upper right corner of the screen. But it was my first experience with anime when I was probably like 5 or 6. It scared the living daylights out of me, and is to this day I think a frightening film and very strange and alien. Long before you got Miyazaki and company. This was Toho. I didn't know any of that when I was 5, 6. When I saw this, I just knew it's like, wow, this is something. And it influenced me a lot. You can find this film on Amazon, I believe. You can rent it, or I don't know, maybe it's on Prime. But the quality's so bad that it's almost not worth watching. And I'm not even saying it's a good film. It's a trippy film. It's very, very bizarre. But it influenced me in ways I didn't even realize. All my life, I had these images in my head, and I didn't know where they came from. And then, so we always draw these little bat characters and stuff that look like this, without knowing why. So anyway, just a little bit of trivia. So another influence was Jack and the Witch, this 60s film that I saw in the early 70s when I was a kid. So back to it. So first things first is I spent a lot of time practicing drawing my bat character over the years. So I didn't need to do a model sheet. If you're going to do 2D animation, you need to create a model sheet for your character. You need to know your character inside and out. I can't tell you how many times I've had students who want to sit down and start drawing a character and haven't really given it a lot of thought, and they're kind of making it up as they go. That's fine if you want to just play. If you want to just have some fun, don't stop yourself from doing that. Do whatever you want, as long as you're still drawing and evolving and moving forward. That's all part of the process. But if in terms of trying to make something that's going to be presentable, it's going to help you get a job or show off who you are, then do your homework. To spend some time learning the character, draw it from different angles and with different expressions. And whether it's your character or somebody else's, get really good at drawing the character. You're going to draw it a lot, and you're going to want to draw it in different ways, with squash and stretch and exaggeration and different angles. So it's essential that you know how to draw your character. I say this to my students all the time, and it's funny how some of them don't think about this until they take the class, but they're still welcome, which is you should love to draw. You should really be excited about drawing, and you should be drawing all the time if you want to do 2D animation. One of the reasons that I think I excelled at 3D animation was I got tired of drawing. After doing it for years at Disney and DreamWorks and other studios, there came a point where I just was kind of burnt out and fried. And right on the heels of that came CG animation, and it freed me up to concentrate on motion graphics and applying character to a character rig, one frame at a time, but without having to draw every single frame. And I talked to some of my animation friends, and some of them said that they agreed with that assessment. A lot of them, you may find traditional 2D animators have a bit of a chip on their shoulder about CG animation. And I get it, I understand, because the advent of CG animation made 2D go away. It shouldn't have, it didn't need to have happened, but it did. And so I think that that's maybe misplaced upset, but I can understand people being upset, especially if you didn't like CG animation or didn't you couldn't transition to it very easily. I got lucky. Well, no, I didn't get lucky. I loved it. And I worked at it really hard, and then maybe I got a little bit lucky. But some people just couldn't transition. But the ones that I know who were able to transition agreed. It's like sometimes you just don't feel like drawing, or you don't have skills to draw certain things that you're required to draw. And so I'm not going to name who, but I've said in the past, but animators I knew who were like, they embraced it. They said, I like CG. I like not having to draw every now and then and just focusing on motion and character and acting one frame at a time. There's absolutely room for both. And, you know, going back to the question of, well, what do I like best? I like it all. I like stop motion. I like puppets. I like cutouts. I like digital graphics in all shapes and forms. I started doing digital animation probably as early as, I don't know, the 80s, like 83 or so. I was already doing very, very limited CG animation. And then I got Mac Draw, I think, in 1989. My mom gave me a little mini computer that had, from work, that had that program on it. And I was like, oh, I'll take it. It's a tool. It's a toy. It's something to play with. And so I encourage that. I encourage the exploration. That being said, there's also something to be said about becoming a master. And so I don't know that Glenn Keane embraced CG animation. And I don't think he needed to. And I think he gave it a good shake. He was there for Tangled and assisting the CG animators and making Tangled look more 2D friendly. And we, you know, I've seen the results of that. CG film, animated character films now have a very 2D look, and I think that's because people like Glenn. But then you've got James Baxter, who just embraced it wholeheartedly and went off and taught us a bunch of things about how to do it too. So anyway, so here we go with my scene that I roughed out. So this was a bat scene. This is the animation. I'll just isolate the animation itself. You can see that. It's turned down a little bit. In fact, I'll just bump it up so you can see it better. I turned down the opacity to make it easier to clean up. So I will bump that up a little bit, and then you can see it here. Turn off that. So now you should be able to see it a little bit better. So that's the rough paths that I did. I started actually with a bouncing ball. I don't have that version anymore. That this whole thing started out as a bouncing ball. I just had it kind of bounce into the scene. Thought about, you know, what I wanted to do with squash and stretch and with the wings. And if you go through it rather slowly, you can see, then I went back, after I'd done it as a bouncing ball, I went back and added a lot of detail and erased most of that exploration stuff. So you're actually seeing a little bit more tied down, but you can see it here. You can see how rough I was going when I first started. I always encourage students to draw as rough as you possibly can at this phase. I did poses like this here and there because I wanted to, you know, do some key poses and make sure that the thing was going to work, you know, that I wasn't getting too far off the mark. So these are like key animation tie downs, I guess you'd call them. But for the most part, you know, look at the one that came right after it. You know, those are just placeholders. Those are there to mark the timing and the speed and some of the arcs, and then some of these other ones are there to keep the thing on model. But you know, look at that. That's barely even drawn at all, and yet I knew what it was supposed to represent and what the timing of it was, and I knew I'd go back and clean it up later and make it look nicer. So that was my first pass, was just a bouncing ball, and then I roughed in some details, and then I went in and did some keys that would be more tied down. And if you look at them, I will just play the keys here. I'll just scrub through them a little bit. If you look at just the keys, you should be able to tell the whole story of the scene just with your key poses. So just by playing these, hopefully you can see that the story of this action is visible just with those main key poses that have been tied down a little bit more. you can see what's going on, which is the bat comes in, it bounces around, and then it spreads its wings and smiles. And so those, if you look on my screen, you can see they're designated with red tick marks in the timeline. And then I went through and I added breakdowns to flesh out the scene a little bit more. So now I'll play with those. And by doing that, I got a little bit more of a sense of some of the secondary animation, like the fact that the wings flop around a little bit outside of the parameters of just the key poses. So if I flip through this, you can see that there's some secondary action going on. I think, if I remember right, I did a little bit with the ears, not much, but I wanted the ears to flop a little bit. So that was accomplished outside of the keys themselves. Now, a lot of this stuff too is, it's done pretty off model, but I was pretty sure I'd be able to clean it up. So I'll just play it at speed now with all the in-betweens. So because I'm familiar with this character, I was pretty sure that I'd be able to clean it up in a way that would be sufficient, that it would be a healthy cleanup pass. The worst thing, I think, well, one of the many worst things that you can do, and I talk about animation like it's the whole world's going to come to an end, but when you're working really hard on a scene and you want it to look nice, one of the problems that you can run up against is you're trying to animate your scene while it's in the cleanup pass. You don't want to be animating when you're doing your cleanup pass, because that's going to make it really tough. The cleanup process is pretty arduous. It's difficult, and it requires that you focus on just that. And in a perfect world, all you'd have to do is trace. And in fact, when I did cleanup for many years, it was 10 years, something like that. When I did cleanup for a living for a pretty long time for a lot of good movies, it was all I did, and it demanded a lot of focus, and I kind of, even myself now, forget that it was a skill. It was not something where you're just tracing, but people would call us tracers. They'd say, "Oh, you trace for a living." It's like, no, there's a lot more to it than that. You had to understand animation and be able to draw on model and be able to draw like a machine. There was no vector line drawing. If you don't know what that is, vector is a clean line that you can make with a computer and then adjust like you do in Illustrator. We didn't have that. We drew with mechanical pencils, just taking something and then digging the line into your paper. So it was a real skill to it. But by the same token, I also tell people that you want to reserve that skill and put it separate and make sure that you're not animating while you're doing the cleanup, because it'll make you nuts. But we would do that when we were doing cleanup on films. We would actually be kind of assisting the animators in some ways. One thing that I sometimes say in my classes is the original assistant animation was something more like this, where you'd go into a scene like this one, and you look for places to erase the assistant. I mean, not the animator himself, themselves. The assistant, whoever that might be, would go in and make calls about stuff that needed to be erased, and then make calls about things that needed to be clarified. So, do I knock this line down with an eraser and then replace it with a nice clean line so it doesn't look quite as grungy? That's what the original assistants were all about. They would assist animators, and then that turned into cleanup sometime in, I think, maybe the 80s. I'm not sure 100% when. I know who did it. I'm not going to say, but you can fight it out of me. No, I just don't want to say anything because I don't have any verification for this, and I don't want to drop names. But at some point, somebody said, "Oh, well, let's use a separate sheet of paper, and we will draw a nice clean line on top of another sheet of paper." In this case, with Toon Boom, you do it on another layer. And that becomes a job in and of itself, completely separate from animation. Two separate departments, the animation department and the cleanup one, which, to the best of my knowledge, still exists that way today. If you're doing your own projects, you have to do your own cleanup. You have to take your own roughs and turn them into cleanup drawings. So better to do the rough pass, do it really well, do it really strong, make a nice chart system that's, anybody who's not aware, make sure that you chart things out. So I know this was a key, this was a key, and then this was either a breakdown or just in between that goes between them. And that's how I know how to space my work, my drawings. So if I had here a mouse that looked like that, and here a mouse that looked like this, then the halfway point, might be like that, or might favor one side or the other. But I know because I made a chart, and I can follow myself up, or have somebody else follow me up if I'm so lucky afterwards. But by the time you get to the cleanup pass, you really just want to focus on that, and you want to have as many problems worked out as you can. Some of the problems that I had, for this one is if you look at the feet of the character, they're bouncing around. I had to readjust the placement of the feet so they sat right on the stairs. For the background, I just used a generic clip art background. If I was serious, I'd probably go back and I would replace the background with something I created. I'm not overwhelmed with the animation I ended up with here with the bat, so I don't think I'm going to take it any further. But I definitely finished this thing off. In fact, what I'd like to do now is reserve any anticipation and just show you how this thing ended up. And I'm going to go back and recreate the color and the highlights and everything, but this is basically how the thing ended up. And so, like I said, I mean, it's cute, it's fun, it's very simple, it's not that exciting. It would have been great if I could have finished this before Halloween and I could have shared it. But there are a lot of things I do differently on it, and it's not something I'd use as a showcase. It was more of just an exercise just to see if I could do it and see how fast I could do it. But that's kind of what I was getting at, is, do a bat that bounces into a scene and spreads its wings, and isn't that cute? Ideally I'd have other characters in the scene and they're all reacting to each other, and this would just be more of a background thing because I didn't give it a lot of attention. But I'm still, I'm still happy with it. I'm not displeased with it. I just don't think it's not a showcase piece. Anyway, so getting back to the scene, so that was the next thing I did was after I'd gone through and roughed it out, you can see the rough drawings here. Then I started, I made some tweaks. You can see with the ears that I thought about that and changed some things. And then I just went for it, started in with the cleanup. So you can see here, you can see the cleanup drawings on top of the rough drawings, but I'll isolate them a little more in a second. But I'm playing them together so you can see how much I did change things in some situations. I pull this out a little bit, you can maybe see the difference between the cleanup pass and the rough pass. It's pretty extreme. And that was just a choice that I made when I was doing the cleanup pass. It's like, oh, I want this to in-between more properly. It doesn't look like a good in-between with that rough. The rough was good for me to get the timing worked out and the spacing worked out, but when it really came down to it, it wouldn't have worked with the cleanup. The cleanup pass will always highlight the problems in your scene, and so you want to, like I said, make sure you've got as many things worked out in the rough pass before you do the cleanup pass, and ideally, if you could, you just draw over the top of your roughs. But anybody who's worth their salt knows that, yeah, you're going to have to go in there and do a little surgery. So for Classics AM87, yeah, so I'm going to show you guys now a little bit how I would approach the cleanup pass, doing things on my own. I don't have a studio that can come in and follow me up like this. So I started with the last one, and I actually worked back. So this was like my hero frame. So okay, well, I'm going to use this as the guide for how the character should look. This is how it looked when I roughed it out. This was the cleanup drawing. I have one right next to it that is not colored in, so you can see a little bit more easily. There's the rough one, there's the cleanup one. Or if I take the rough away, there's the rough, or the cleanup, and then there's the rough. So you can see they're pretty close. If you've done a good cleanup pass, then it will retain the life of the animation. You won't lose any of the animation, but you'll gain clarity. So if I zoom in on this a little bit, again, it's still a pretty rough cleanup pass, but I tried to do as clean as I had the patience for. So you can see that's the rough, and then that's the cleanup. Rough, cleanup. And what I was mainly looking to do is I was looking to find sections where I could do nice clean lines like this one, the ears, the wings, things that would make it really easy to spot long, clean lines like this one underneath the wings, or these with the wing. Places where you could create solid shapes that would be easy to in between, because that's one of the hardest things about cleanup is doing in betweens. And then having done that, then it was a matter of going through and doing all my keys. So I did all the keys first. So I'll go through those and just show you how those turned out. So I started again. I started from the back and I worked my way forward because all the detail work was at the end. So by going backwards, I was able to make the first ones are really easy. The first drawings that I did the face isn't there, and the wings aren't spread out, so it's moving really fast. So those are the easier ones. For those of you who are doing your own work, doing your own scenes, I can't recommend enough that you consider starting with the hard parts first, and then moving on to the easy parts, leaving those for last. There are two philosophies. You could either do the easy stuff last, or you could also do the most interesting stuff last. My belief from studying and from psychology and things like that, and from doing this for a really long time, is that we are not meant to finish things, we people. And we're really good at starting stuff, but we're really not that good at finishing things. It's just not how we're wired. And so you have to trick yourself, you have to convince yourself, you have to negotiate, and then you have to really know yourself and know what your energies are like and what your pace is like. And so you have to understand how you're going to work and what the complications are going to be. In this case, I have very limited time, and what time I do have, I have limited energies. And so in order to get this done at all, which again, I started this before Halloween, I knew that I was going to have to keep the character very simple. So you'll see that there's not a lot of detail on this character. Even the fact that the claws are fill-inable shapes is, that's something that had to be negotiated. I often joke, look at the fangs and the insides of the eyes, all that stuff had to be thought out. It's like, well, do I really want to have those things that you have to be painted in, or would I prefer to have them things that I just draw with a thick pencil line? I always joke about I think it was Dorado, they were discussing, well, should the characters have rings and should they have stripes and things like that? And the person who was head of the cleanup department at that time, who was a friend of mine, he explained to me, he says, well, I went and I figured out mathematically how many frames would be in the average scene, how many average scenes were in the film, how long the film was, and based on that calculated how much that ring would cost. So just to have a ring on a character's finger is going to cost X amount of thousands of dollars of person power. And when the powers that be at DreamWorks heard that, this is one of those stories where I'm just going to say this, and then maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I'll leave that up to you to decide. But allegedly, then they balked and said, well, then let's not put any rings on the characters' fingers because it just costs too much. And by contrast, if you look at a film like Hunchback of Notre Dame, again, I'm talking in the 90s. That's when I worked in the business in 2D. So that's my point of reference. But if you look at the Hunchback of Notre Dame on Frollo, it was animated by my good friend, lots of rings, lots of stripes, lots of little dots, and lots of weird little defining lines inside of the face, inside of the cloak, which is dark and you can't even see it. And they had the money and they had the interest, and they wanted to make a beautiful piece that would be highly detailed, kind of in the style of Pinocchio, another Disney film that was really highly detailed. And so it was worth it to them. They calculated how much it was going to cost and just went for it. But in a film like Dorado, they were like, well, let's just maybe ease off of that. But if you look at any frame from Dorado, you'll see a lot of highlights and tones and highlights. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later today on this character. But that was a budgetary concern. And if you look at, I believe it's Hercules, the Disney film Hercules, there's a lot of tones and highlights in parts of the film, and then there are no tones and highlights later in the film, and that's because they were running out of resources and time. And so you can see in the film that they just didn't have the resources and the time to do all the tones and highlights they wanted to do. And that's something that you got to figure out ahead of time. You have to negotiate those things when you're doing your own film with yourself. You have to go, well, if I do this hero frame, which is this last one, then I'm going to have to calculate how long it took me to do that frame, and then go from there and decide, can I do this realistically, or am I going to have to make some cuts, with the insides of the wings or the color of the ears or whatever, and decide how much I can handle. So now I'm going to add breakdowns so you can see how this thing looked once I did the keys. Then I went and I did the breakdown pass. So JD, hey JD, welcome. So your response. So you're saying all the characters should just be nude to help with the budget costs, of course. Well, as it happens, I did end up drawing nude 2D animation characters. If you see El Dorado or Prince of Egypt, yes, I drew Miguel jumping out of they're in a hot spring. And first they take off their clothes and they jump into it, and then they jump out of it because they're being attacked by leeches or something. And I don't remember, something was attacking them. And isn't that funny to see their butts? It was like that one, or Titan IE was the first mainstream 2D big budget animated film that had nudity in it. Male nudity, at least, I guess. I don't know about female. I mean, Bakshi's been doing nudity for years, but those were not big budget mainstream films. Those were, the first one, Fritz the Cat, that one was rated X, and then Wizards was rated PG. Well, and then Fantasia, that has female nudity in it. Close-ups of upper level nudity. I'm trying to keep it clean here because kids watch this. But, I mean, they had nudity in film, but with El Dorado, they specifically went for it. It was a decision they made early on. So we're going to have this funny scene where they're running around with their behind sticking out. And I drew it. I didn't animate it, but I did the cleanup. And I did the same thing on Prince of Egypt. There's a scene where they undress him and get him washed up, and isn't that funny? And I will say, in some ways it was easier, in some way it was more difficult. In some ways it was easier because there wasn't all that adornment, but in some ways it was more difficult because there were full body shots. And so when you've got a costume shot, you're usually only talking about what you can see on the screen right here, which is a profile, or like a photography session shot, from the chest up. And I always thought those were easier, but I like to draw faces. And so when I was drawing Miguel in the buff, I had to draw the whole character from top to bottom. But then I also did a lot of drawings of characters fully in the screen with all their clothes on. And it was definitely harder. So yeah, it was. So JD, yes, we should have the first nudist 2D Disney animation film. I'll let you get on that one, and you can sell it by saying that the budget will be a lot cheaper. I like that one. That's good. Anyway, so here now I've included the breakdown. So I did the cleanup pass first, and then the breakdown pass for this Batty character. And then after that, I went through and filled in the in-betweens by doing a cleanup line. So if you look here, you can see each one of them. I also ended up doing more drawings than I had done in the rough pass. And then I made some choices about things like making the ears flip. So if you watch that slowly, you can see some of the choices I made there that are slightly different than what I was doing with the rough. But I did that because, I knew this character and I knew what I wanted to do with it. And then also, too, I went back, and after I'd cleaned up some of the keys, I went, let me adjust my rough animation because it doesn't look quite right anymore. So one more time, just for laughs before I move on, I'll show you the difference between or some difference between the roughs and the cleanups. So here's a pretty good one. Even at the beginning, I was making choices about the volume of the cleanup. So that's the rough, that's the cleanup. This rough was just thrown in there to give me an idea of the speed, the timing. And when I went to clean it up, I actually used the drawings before and after, which you can do very easily by turning on the onion skin. And there you can see that I've got, in this case, 2 drawings before and 2 after. Anyway, so there's one before and one after. If you look now at the rough, you can see, I don't know if you'll be able to see this or not, but if you've been doing this for a while, you'll be able to spot this. Here's the line for the character's back on the drawing number whatever, 1. Here it is on drawing number 3, and here's where it would have been on drawing number 2. So that means we had one here, and then one down here. We were looking for an arc that would connect persistence of vision so that it would look like it's one smooth object and not a bunch of different objects bouncing around on the screen. If the line had been down here, then it would go like this. It would be wiggly and it would bounce around on the screen. So when I went to do the cleanup pass, I moved it so that the back now fit in with the arc and connected a line so that you see the back as one continuous motion and you aren't looking at what would otherwise look at like individual drawings bouncing around inside of a scene. And that is one of the main arts of in-betweening, which you must know whether you're doing cleanup or you're doing just rough animation. Look at it now in the rough pass and you'll say, well, I mean, what's the difference? You know, I mean, it actually, to be perfectly honest, the way I animated it, and if you see, it's like, oh, well, you know, there's the back there, there's the back there. It's down a little bit, but it's not that big of a deal. But remember what I was saying, when you do the cleanup pass, everything's going to be exaggerated and it's going to be harder to hide things like that, which is again why rough animation and cleanup are 2 entirely different things, and you should assess them in their own. With roughs, all I was doing was trying to figure out, well, how do I fill in the motion so that this looks nice and smooth, and get my ideas down as quickly and cleanly as I possibly can. But that's why, you know, when animators are drawing, they'll draw really rough, and like when Clint Keane, if you look at his roughs for Pocahontas, you know, they're like this, and that's, you know, that's how he was drawing Pocahontas's hair. And then the cleanup artist would have to go in there. I mean, again, look it up, Pocahontas rough, and you'll see that that's, I mean, I drew about 1,000 of these in my day. And that's where we had to go through and go, okay, well, how do I clean that up? What about that? How do I clean this up? Where do I find the one single line? Or what about a case like this? How do I find the one single line that makes it look like Pocahontas's hair? And suddenly it becomes a lot more difficult, because if you do the wrong one, it's going to lose the quality of the animation, and it may be off model and not look quite right. So anyway, so getting back to the cleanup pass, so that's why I made the decision to change the animation here and then in many other frames so that it no longer is in the same place. I kept some of it. I kept the feet and I kept the knees, the legs, but the body itself I actually had to clean up and make look a little bit more unified. So class exam, you're saying, you got it, good. Working on smoothing your animation with less frames. Yeah, so that's the ticket, isn't it? So in this case, I did everything on ones because it became clear to me that unless it was on ones, it just wasn't going to look smooth enough. It's moving so fast that you know, even here, I could probably do another drawing between this one and this one, but then the speed of it wouldn't look right. And I wanted it to pop up into that frame and then continue on. This one, that's not a very nice in between, but I had to go from here to here. And in the rough, you know, it was just a blur. And in the real world, it probably would be a blur. You'd probably have motion blur. And that's something else I talk about in my classes is at a certain point, what do? Do you draw motion lines? Like, would you go onto this drawing and go like that and try to emphasize that, you know, the character's coming from a place? All that's doing, all these lines do, is that they emphasize the arc that the character was already traveling on. And they work the same way that motion blur does and blur does in live action films. And so if you go look at old Donald Duck cartoons or Bugs Bunny, every now and then you'll see like a smear, like a line. And we call them smears. And those are just there to kind of fill in the way that motion blur does. It helps extend that arc so that our brains can see persistence of vision. But the thing is when you draw lines like this, if they show up in your scene, it's not really desirable. So if you play this at speed, you'll see that there's just this frame where the ladders, that's just not going to work. And so one tool that you have at your disposal is exaggeration. So if you notice here, I make the body squish really hard. And then if you notice here later in the scene when the character's reaching down with his leg, you can see that he really stretches out in a way that he wasn't, it's a lot more stretchy than he was before. In fact, I'd probably go back and do this differently if I did it again. They're just moving so fast, it doesn't bother me for now. But I probably would exaggerate the leg a lot more, probably get rid of this frame, or maybe one of these frames, and just really exaggerate his leg and really squish his face. But you see how exaggerated his head is, how it's long and pointy. It almost looks like a rabbit. And then he flattens out and then becomes a little bit more normal shaped by the end of it. But so all those were done to make it look smoother. All that, because at that point it's on 2s. And so rather than doing extra drawings, which would have made it look smoother, I just went in and exaggerated things so that you can feel the arc that the character is on. And so I wouldn't have to do the whole thing on 1s. So there you go. That's what it looks like, the cleanup pass. So do hand-drawn animation, trying to save your paper too. Yeah, well, that was always the case too. When I was practicing animation, I worked at a studio that did high-end animation commercials. They worked on the Toontown sequence of Roger Rabbit and worked as an outsourced studio for Disney. And that's where I got my start. And so they worked on the absolute best paper. The paper that they had was so thick, it felt like bed sheets. It felt like 1,000 count bed sheets, and you'd run your hands over the top of it. It was smooth, yet it had give, and it was really thick and really white. And I worked on that stuff for a really long time until I went to another studio. And I was like, what gives? This paper garbage. I was so spoiled. I was very young. But I'm just like, oh, I thought all studios worked with that paper. And it turns out that they don't. And when I look back and I think of just how much paper I went through when I was practicing to be an animator, stacks and stacks of this stuff. And I had to buy a ream of it. When I wanted to do my own short film, I had to buy a stack of paper from Cartoon Color, who I think is still in existence. And they would sell you paper that was registered at the bottom to put on pegs. And I don't remember what it was. I tend to think it was probably in the value of $60 to $80 for a ream, as you call it, of paper. And that would roughly be, I don't know, a couple hundred, maybe 300 sheets or something. My drawing, the amount of drawings in my first short film were, I want to say 5,000, if that, I don't know. It's been a long time. Nobody cares. But the point is, wow. So for 5,000 pieces of paper at $60 to $80 for a ream of 300 sheets, it's like, oof, that's a lot of money for films. And so films cost a lot of money when I was young. And that's why I didn't make more of them, is it was just too expensive. I got really lucky. My first film, my main short animated film was a 5-minute piece that I did. Very limited animation, and the studio just gave me carte blanche. They said, you can use paper that we are not using, that was experimental paper that didn't match, that they couldn't use. So they said, oh, you can take it. And so I got thousands of sheets of paper for free. I was already doing Xeroxing for them. So they said, yeah, you can Xerox. It won't take that much for ink. And then I got a whole bunch of just boxes of paint that they could no longer use, little cups of cell animation paint. That stuff is so expensive. And then the big coup that I got was well, I can say his name because he's a saint. But he said, well, it was Dale Bear for Bear Animation. He said, we've got all this footage, 35 millimeter film that we can't use. They call it short ends. And it's when the film canister back then is like 10 minutes long, the film. When it's getting towards the end, they don't want to risk ruining the film somehow when they unspool it and send it to the lab. So they would stop it at a certain point, like several feet before the end of the reel of raw film, negative. And they said that stuff just sits in little cans and we don't use it. It just sits there. And if you want to use that to make your animated film with, then you could have your film be shot on 35 millimeter. And so just to review, I had free paper, free Xeroxing, free cells, the animation plastic cells, which were also ridiculously expensive, and whole batches of them that were not usable for whatever reason by the studio. And so they gave them to me. So paper, animation cells, free paint, and then I was a checker, or I could check, so I could do my own free checking. Checking is just making sure everything's registered. I knew how to paint cells, so I could do that myself. I knew how to Xerox, so I could do that myself. Then I made my own backgrounds. That wasn't hard. I used, I don't know, whatever I used. And then free film, free 35 millimeter film, enough to make a 5-minute short film with, and then camera time. So I got the use of the cameraman in the studio. They were friendly. They liked me. They let me come in. Just for the record, one of them let me come in when he'd been having a couple cocktails. That was an interesting evening. But I got to make my short film. And then I think that was it. I mean, I had to pay for the sound myself, and I paid for lab time, and I paid at CSI. I paid for screening rooms to look at my film when it was done. And I can honestly say that it looked beautiful technically as far as the film goes, but the film itself was not nearly up to the standards of the way it was shot. And so it's kind of funny. I showed it at DreamWorks right before I left. There was a film festival there, and I played it. And I just couldn't believe how beautiful it looked on their state-of-the-art multi-million-dollar screening facility for the whole audience. And it was shot on 35. And I was looking at details going, wow, I didn't remember that. And then it sounded great too, because I had the sound done, I think at CSI. And so it sounded good, it looked good, but it's just not that good of a film. It's a cheap student film done with the budget of a big film, just because those things were donated. And what do we learn from this? What's the lesson that everyone can take away from that? It's be friendly, be nice. It's not, oh, well, they gave me all this free stuff. Wasn't I lucky? Wasn't I cool? No, when the time came and I was needing favors, these people donated this stuff to me. They said, we will give you this stuff because you're trying to make a short film and we want to support you. To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure I ever paid them back sufficiently. If I was a different person, again, I was very young, I think I just took it and I ran with it. If I was a different person now, I would actually find a way, maybe it's not too late, to pay them back. I thanked them profusely. I worked hard for them. I did freelance long after the studio had changed and tried to work off my debts that way. But honestly, they just gave me this stuff and they didn't ask for anything in return. And I think it's because I was a nice person and I was eager and ambitious and I loved the craft. And they saw that and they said, well, it doesn't cost us anything. Here you go. So that's how I look at networking and schmoozing, for want of a better word, is if you're a cool person, if you show initiative, people will respond. And if you have something to offer, people will respond to that too. There's a phrase in Hollywood that I've heard bandied about a lot, which is if you have something, Hollywood will find you. So those of you who are writing scripts or coming up with ideas, I mean, you have to share those ideas. Those ideas have to get out there somewhere, somehow. But the truism is that if you have something that's worth something, then Hollywood is going to find it because they want it. If they think they can make money off of you, they will offer it to you. I've also heard people say Hollywood is not in the business of stealing things from people. So they don't want to see your ideas unless they have a crack at being able to purchase them and going through the proper channels. But if you have something that somebody wants, then you'll know. They'll come after you. And I've seen it time and again. I've had people come after me and say, oh, could you do this? Could you do that? We'll pay you if you'll do this or that. And that's because I had something that they wanted. Right now, it might be my name. So I've done a lot of speaking engagements or like, oh, could you come and talk at this school or do whatever? And that's because they saw my IMDb profile and saw I worked at some great places on some great films. So it's the same for you if you're getting started, whoever you are out there, is if you have something and you share it, they will come to use an old cliche line. So hi to you, whoever just said hi, welcome. Welcome to my stream. So now that I've shown you the cleanup pass, I'm going to show you what happens next. Oh, thank you for that. So now that you've seen the cleanup pass, you can see what I'm going to do with the color. And so that was Classics AM, I believe. Thank you. That's awesome. So to do the cleanup pass, what I had to do, I've already done this because I thought it would be boring to watch. But what I did was there's this thing in Toon Boom. I'll point to it here on the screen. You can see it. Oh, here, this way. Right here, there's this eye icon. If you have Toon Boom at home, go ahead and try this. If you don't have Toon Boom, at least you know that this is a thing. But this eye icon is the color art layer. So color art layer system. And what it gives you the ability to do is break up your line and your color. So right now it's on L, that's for line. Set line as current layer, it's highlighted, and so you can see that the line is the one available, so that's L. Underneath that is the color layer. And so what I did is I selected the line layer, and then I hit the special button, which is right here. And by doing so, that put a system, you'll see it in a sec, a system on the color layer by which I could color things underneath my line. If you've ever worked with Photoshop, you've probably dealt with something like this. I'll show it to you now and you can see how it looks. So that's how the color art layer looks. It looks very much like Illustrator, meaning I could go in there if I wanted to and I could mess around with some of this stuff. And you may have to do that if you find that your colors, they're not working quite right. You may find that you need to go in there and you need to mess around with some of these and adjust things. But for the most part, it just gives you the ability to color in behind the lines of your line layer. And you'll notice that when I switched from the line layer to the color layer, the lines that I had drawn just a minute ago, those all disappeared. So see, there they are, they're on, now they're off. I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of those because they don't line up anymore anyway. And then I'll show you how it works and show you again what I ended up with by doing this. So there's the color layer. So now all it means is I have to go to my paint icon. So that's, again, right over here, there's this paintbrush icon. And then choose the colors that I want. I've already designated what those are going to be because I had done, again, I'd done a mock-up of what the colors are going to look like, at least a base mock-up of what the colors will look like when I'm done. So I had that to draw from, but you'll see that that is not on the color layer. So this one is going to be on the color layer. So I chose a grayish color for the bat's body. If I go in here and now just start zapping it, then you can see it starts filling in the colors. I'll just stop at that one for now and then show you again. Here's what it looks like with the line. Here's what it looks like with the color. And then I can push that icon button and I can see what it looks like with both. So now you can see how the line has gone behind. And what's nice about this is now if I wanted to go in here and get crazy and do something funny, with the colors, all that stuff is going to be behind the line. You can see it already. If I just focus on the color layer alone, you can see I can just paint like crazy, and it's creating paint vector lines. But when I turn the line layer on, you can see that they're behind the character. So you can imagine that that's cool for doing color separations or tones and highlights, at least the way that I did them for this scene. But it's all that glitters is not gold. Still, really, if you wanted to do proper tones and highlights, On this character, what you might want to do is paint, in one color on the color layer, like so, and then paint in another color. I'll just pick something random, and paint the rest of it like that, and then really make sure that you're doing tones and highlights with a very distinct line. What you'll see with the way that I did it for the purposes of this assignment is it's very uneven, it's very imperfect, and so the lines shimmer. I wanted that effect, I wanted it to look like that, so that's not a problem. But if I had wanted the tones and highlights to be a little more consistent, it wouldn't have worked. Really, what I wanted to do then is I would have wanted to say, all right, on the color line layer, I'm going to draw the highlight to here, and then zap it with color, and then follow that through for the rest of the scene and animate it much the way that I did everything else in this scene. You can imagine why I didn't do that, because it would have taken a really long time, and I just didn't think this animation was worth it. It's just for fun. It's just cute and silly. So I did not go to the trouble of doing actual color separations. But in a little bit, I'll show you how how I actually did do it. But just to review, so here I'll show you the scene again for anybody who's just joined us, or anybody who wants to review. This is the final look that I got. So notice that the tones and the highlights, I don't know if you can see this well on your screen or not, but if you look really close, you'll see the tones, that's the white color, the leading edge on the bat's face that's facing the window. So it's the idea is supposed to be like the moon's coming in, giving him just a little bit of a glow, a rim light. It shimmers. It shimmers all over the place. It's very uneven, and it's very kind of staccato. And I figured, well, it's supposed to be moonlight, so that doesn't bother me. But I wouldn't try to get away with that if I wanted this to be a much more finalized scene. I'm doing that because, again, this is just a silly little bit of business. So I did tones. If I stop this here, you'll see it better. I did tones on the left side of the character's body, and then did shadows on the right side of the body. And it just gives it a little more of a dimension, makes it a little bit more three-dimensional. Without that, well, you'll see, because I'm going to play around with color here for a little bit. You'll see what it looks like. But without that, it looks very flat. And with this, it just adds a little bit of depth, and it helps clarify some parts of the character. So I'll show you how I did that in a minute, but let's just get to coloring some things. And again, please feel free to ask anything you like, or discuss anything you like while I'm doing coloring. It's not the most exciting thing in the world to watch, perhaps, but I will continue to ply you with the usual anecdotes and stories while I'm doing this. But anyway, so I'm just now coloring in parts of the body with specific parts of color. I'll just do this for a little while, and then I'll start going into the tones and highlights and show you how I did that. But here is what the process is like. It can be relaxing, it can be fun. It can also be aggravating if you haven't closed off lines. You will find that there are parts of the character that don't get colored in. What you're seeing here is just like little areas that were split when I transferred it from the line art to the color art. And that's just something you got to deal with. It's just a tolerance that you have to deal with. You can change that tolerance if you want to, but I'm happy with it. It's fine. So gray was first, and then we'll do the black second. So that's the toes. I knew people, oh, there's one that doesn't color in. So I'm trying to zap it with color, and you'll notice it doesn't quite work. In this case, I can go in with a brush and just zap it really quickly. Because I'm doing this on the color layer, it will automatically be underneath the line art. So when you see it like that, it looks fine. But what I'll do is I'll just turn off the outside, and you can see, so see, that's how it's going to look. It looks just fine when you turn it back on again. I like to color with the line on, so I can actually see that things are being filled in and they look pretty. But it's just a matter of zapping the color. So that one toe, that one never gets colored in, right? It's because I didn't finish it off properly when I drew it, and then I just copied and pasted it so that it wouldn't jitter all over the place. But we've got the nose, and then we've got the two eyes. That's it for black. Then his eye color is yellow. I call it a he, but it's actually more of an it. It's a they. I chose. I have chosen to make his teeth white. It just seems simpler. I could have made him yellow, but who cares? And then I had an inside mouth color that I designated. It's good when you're setting up colors. It's good when you're setting up colors to label them. I get in the habit of just like going, oh, it's black, it's white, it's red, it's green. And if you're not doing a lot of colors, that's not a problem. But when you start getting into shades, like say, for example, I've got the mouth and I want to have a tongue color. Well, I would go to this plus sign, add color, create a color, it's new. And then I would call it tongue. And then I'd change it a little bit and say, oh, I want it to be a little more red, a little more amber, so that when I draw a tongue inside of there, I'm not going to draw a tongue, but if I were to draw a tongue in there and paint it like that, then I'd be able to designate that as being different from the mouth color, which is a little bit more of a maroon situation. So you can imagine what's the difference between the mouth color and the tongue when I'm looking at it here. I could get that confused really easily. And so it's a really good idea to label things and not just leave them as red number 6, or new red number, whatever, or leave it up to Toon Boom to call them whatever it wants to call them. So labeling things really early. And I labeled this when I did the, the hero, and call it hero, like the one that's isolated, the one that set the tone for the rest of them. I can see now I actually got some things wrong, but that one, I don't even think this frame shows in the final scene. But anyway, so going back to the one that I was working on at the time. So now I'm just going to go in and fill it in with the paint bucket and fill in the last of the colors. And then that effectively is frame 1. So again, when you're doing this yourself, you want to ask yourself, well, how long did it take me to do that? And this scene is approximately 50 some frames, about 3/4 of which are on ones, meaning it is actually going to be, in the neighborhood of 40 to 50 frames, 40 something. And so again, I had to think about that before I decided. When I was going back and I was coloring it in here, I'm like, okay, how long did it take me to do that? Because that's how long it's going to take for each frame. Do I have the person power to actually do that myself? And then go from there. So that's why I chose these. I would love to go in and make in fact, I do think I did the inside of the wings. I think on the actual final one, I actually did another color for the inside of the wings, but I'm not gonna worry about that. You've seen that I already did finish this. I'm just showing you how I did it. So to save time, I would actually go in and just zap this with all the colors, and then zap in some of the details that didn't get picked up. Again, I copied and pasted this. That's why it's got the same little deviations from the one previous. And so if I really cared, I'd go in and I'd fix all that stuff on each frame. But as you can see, it's just as fast to do it this way. So then I go and do the black nails. This one I know I can't paint because it's just a copy and paste from the last one. And then I do the black nose and black eyes or pupils or whatever they are. You can see that I didn't worry too much about when I drew this. It's like, oh, his line is like that. When I drew it, it was like that. Well, that's because I knew I was going to paint it black anyway. So why go to all the trouble of making sure the interior lines are nice and clean when I know it's all just going to be one solid black color. So that was a way of saving time. It's all about saving time, saving energy. There are some people who are like, no, every single frame of this must be perfect. If you're wired that way, you will work. I mean, you're going to find yourself. That's what I said. They'll find you because they need people who are that dedicated. But for the rest of us, it's more of a matter of, well, how can I get through this quickly and get on to the fun? Or in this case, it's like, well, I spent most of my time doing the animation, and then the coloring itself is a means to an end. I want it to look pretty, but that is not where I'm going to be spending most of my time because this project doesn't warrant it. And then this one, I just have to color it with a brush because it won't be colored any other way. So boom, there it goes. So that wasn't too bad. Timing wise, that didn't take me too long. So it's conceivable that I could go through and I could color all this, within a few hours, that I'm not going to be spending weeks and weeks coloring this thing for something that in all fairness is just such a silly little move. You know, it's just a quick little one and done action. It's not something that it warrants spending weeks and weeks on to make it look gorgeous. One of these days I'll have something like that, but it will require me to have a lot more time. I'm not fishing either for sympathy or respect. I'm just merely stating as a fact that I am finishing up on my master's. I have been getting my master's degree all this time, and that's one of the challenges of my time and why I don't get to do more fun projects like this. But also too, I think it's fair to finish things on screen. For anybody who watches these from week to week, it's like, well, no, I didn't skip any steps. This is what I did. I just did it behind the scenes in order to get on to the next one and have some, and keep things fresh. Now here's a situation where I think it's wonderful about, oh, by the way, Classics AM87, thank you, I appreciate that. I appreciate compliments. I'm human just like everybody else. It's nice to hear if you guys enjoy things, and then I'll continue doing things like that. So here's an example where the color layer, so it looks like I was just coloring on the line layer. Oops, oh well, I'm not going to fix it. But if you're on the color layer, you can go like this. You know, I can paint that in, and then as you see, I was painting behind the line. If I happened to be painting on the line layer, I would have noticed, oops, I actually covered up the line, didn't want to do that. That's one of the benefits of separating things from the line layer onto the color layer, is so that you can get this effect. I could also now go in here and I could adjust that line layer so it meets up nicely with the leg without having to go back and repaint anything or do anything crazy. So I think it's a really good idea to split things onto the color layer and make sure that you have those two layers separated. The main reason I did it this way was because I wanted to do tones and highlights on this, because I thought it would make a fun example. And so that was this specific reason that I split this up into the line layer and the color art. Many times if I'm just going to color something in, I'll leave it all in one layer. It gets a little bit heavy. I won't lie, when you split things, at least for me it does, when you split things up into the line layer and the color layer, you find that your scene file is getting a lot heavier. It's having to calculate a lot more. This is something that's unique to the world of CG animation, hence CG Spectrum. What we're doing right now is CG animation in its own funny kind of way. And so your scene file, your assets, it starts bogging things down if you're doing too much with tones and highlights and multiple layers. So it's just something to think about. Now here, we have a situation where I can't fill this in for the life of me. It's like, oh, just can't do it. The paint bucket will not fill in. If you've ever worked with Illustrator or Animate CC, which used to be Flash, you may have encountered this before. When vector lines aren't filled in, what do? So in a case like this, one thing I can do is I can go up to Drawings, Clean Up, and I can close gaps. So Drawing, Clean Up, Drawing menu item, Clean Up, Close gaps. And then it gives me an option here, and it says two things. One, how aggressive do you want me to get? In this case, I'll go about halfway. Why not? And then it offers up this option, which is apply to all drawings. You have to be careful about this, because if you apply it to all the drawings with the setting this high, you're going to find all sorts of little, what are they called, mosaic meshes that you have to fill in with paint. That can really, really extend the amount of time you spend painting. It makes it so that you're, you know, in a case like this with the bat, I'm hitting the body, I'm hitting the ears, hitting half the face, hitting the wings, and that's kind of it. And that takes seconds, right? But if I have to go through and paint all the little details, which you've seen, some of these details like around the mouth, around the eyes, I have to zap those with color too. That's really going to extend the life of, it's going to make your process a lot longer. So maybe you don't want to close gaps on every single frame and just see how many frames you can get away with that were easy. If it gets to the point where you're finding that you just, like, the whole drawing you can't fill it in because there are too many gaps, then maybe you want to go in here and close gaps. Or maybe you want to do all the ones you can without closing gaps. And the ones that are left, then you can go and do a fill in of the gaps for that. But I'm just going to set this really high and see if that helps at all. And then if that doesn't work, then there's one more thing you can do, but we'll see. See how that went. So there you go. So it filled in the gaps. I'm done. But another thing you can do, I'll do it on the next one. I'll show you. So let's see how this one does with filling in gaps. So I can zap the body. Ooh, it's already bad. So right now it's only letting me do the wings, and that's about it. Let's see about the head, let's see about the face. So I'm moving in here and getting tighter and tighter on it, and it's like, oop, nope, that's not good. So I'll start with filling in the gaps because I want to show what happens when you set the setting too high, or if you were to do this to every single drawing. So I'll set it really high this time. Let's see what happens. So we go in here to paint it, and first let's just see if it even worked. So it did pretty well. That's still not that big of a deal. I still think it. Here you go. This is what I was looking for. So look at this. Look at this network that's been set up. I have to now paint every single one of these little tiny gaps in here. Otherwise, I'm going to have spaces that aren't painted. So it still really wasn't that bad. I still don't feel like that was a big expenditure for what I got for not having to go in and do it. I'm going to show you guys in a sec. It still was more economical to do it this way than to do what I'm going to do in a minute. But you can see how that did take a little bit longer than the other one, where I was just like 1, 2, 3, done. If anything, I just have to go in here and find these. Look at that one. Now that probably wouldn't even be noticed if you saw the final product. It's like nobody's even going to notice that wasn't colored in, but I noticed. You know, it's my scene and I want to make sure it's nice. And just for the record, another thing you can do is you can take these points and you can adjust the points. Let's do it this way. You can take these points and adjust them, and then you can color that way too. But again, this is, you know, that's taken a long time to do all that. And then sometimes to calculate that Toon Boom gets confused, or not confused, but you're asking it to do a lot of work. I mean, look at all these points on that thing. Now that I asked it to close gaps, I've had the program stall. I've had it crash. By the way, this would be a really good time to save. I don't want to save this because I don't want to keep any of this. This is just for demo purposes. You know, so when you ask a program to do a lot, it can sometimes get overwhelmed and crash you or freeze, same thing. And then you have to manually shut it down and open it up. And guess what? If you didn't save before you did that, then you've lost all your work, lost everything. If you're going to do something like have the gaps closed, you might want to save right beforehand and then do the gap filling, which is going to put a lot of strain on the program, and then proceed from there. I can't stress enough that it's a good idea to just save anytime you've done something significant. So if I was doing this for real, I would be going in here and saving every time I did something prominent. But because I'm doing this as a demo, I don't really care if this crashes. It's more about just showing you how this stuff is done. But yeah, save, save, save. I have a favorite story that I love to tell. When I was first getting started in the business, I worked for an editing house, and we worked with actual film. It was right when we were on the cusp of going digital. So they were still using analog film, which I loved. That's what I wanted to do. I loved working with film and actually cutting film and editing it together. So I got started as an editor in Hollywood when I first started, right down the street from a school where I work on La Brea. The building is still there. So what they said to me was they said, we've got these things called film cores. And film core was a plastic circle that looked like this. And on the outside was where the film was. And we'd lay them on a platen. And we'd roll the film around and edit and cut it and look at it on a little screen, right? So they said, under no circumstances should you ever hold the film from the outside. If you hold the film core from at all, you're going to hold it from underneath the core itself, and then the outside, which looks like an old analog album, like an LP, then you hold it with one edge. So one hand underneath, one hand on the side. If you don't do that, if you hold it from the outside, the center of the core will drop. And so if the center of it drops out, then you're going to have the film sprawling all over the place, and you're going to spend hours and hours and hours rolling it back up. Well, sure as the world, one day I actually went in and held the film like this because I was dumb and young and I didn't listen. And the core fell out of the film, and I spent hours rolling it back up and damaged the print a little bit too. It's fine as a work print. And that taught me, it's like when people tell you things like this, listen. So when I'm saying save, 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 version up, save, version up, I mean it, and keep doing it, because if you don't, you'll find that you'll lose work. Listen to what I say and learn from what mistakes I made, or you'll be sorry. Now, granted, what you'll probably do is you'll do it and you'll make mistakes and then you'll finally learn. But remember, I tried to warn you. So anyway, hi Shabaj, hopefully I'm saying that well. Welcome. And so you want to do VFX, and so you want me to talk about 3D modeling, rigging, and rendering. Well, I have a recommendation for you. We have other streams that CG Spectrum does where they talk about exactly those things: 3D modeling, rigging, and rendering. As it happens, I don't actually do those things. I've worked with them a lot. I know a lot of people who do them, but I don't do them myself. All I could tell you is that I think it's amazing. I hope you do continue to pursue it. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about that, we have all sorts of streams on CG Spectrum where they talk about those things, and they'd be delighted to answer any questions you have. So please feel free and check out the schedule and find out when they're going to be talking about those things, and be sure and tune in. You'll have a lot of fun, because there are pros who've been doing this stuff for a really long time, who work in the business even now, who teach at CG Spectrum and offer these classes. So yeah, so tonight, unfortunately, we're not talking about CG modeling, rigging, or rendering. Sorry about that. But if you want to know about 2D, you've come to the right place. So I'm just going to finish off one more of these, because I want to show how you can, another way that you can actually finish off painting something like this if you find that you're not able to paint it, that the program won't let you paint. Your first go-to is probably just to fill in the gaps, but there's another option that you have. And then after that, I'm going to go in and do some tones and highlights to finish out today's presentation of 2D stuff, and then I'll show you again what I was working on. All right, so let's take a look at this ear. So the problem is the ear will not paint in. Well, why? That's what you got to ask yourself. Well, because somewhere there's a gap that's not been closed off. Usually what you can do is you can just go in and you can paint on the color layer any place that there's a line join, and that will often be enough. And there you go, so that finishes it off. Now I'm using a brush that's got a soft edge to it. That's why it has, you can see these lines here, so that's not really very pleasant to look at. But the point is that that's how you can go in and fix it up. In fact, maybe I'll just go pick a better brush for the paint tool, and then you'll see that that's what's causing it to look that way. So if I do like a fixed tip brush, or an ink brush, that one will probably work all right. We'll try that again. Yeah, it's still a little bit too brushy for me. But anyway, you get the idea. So you can fill in the gaps manually by going in with a brush and just drawing around the edges of it. And sometimes if you just do the joins like this, that'll work. Sometimes you actually have to physically go in and draw around the outside of the edge, at which point you might as well just finish the dang thing off. But that's another option if you find that the gaps aren't filling. You saw that I was doing that with the toes. But for my money, your first bet is always going to be going into drawing, clean up, close the gaps, and then set it pretty high. And then that should give you the ability to paint in solid shapes. So classics, you asked, do you have any tips if I want to make a short animated film? I have one main tip. You're going to laugh, but the tip is ask yourself why you want to make a short film. Now, I've had people say to me, it's like, well, I just want to do it. To you, I say, well, then go do it. What's stopping you? The reason I say that why do you want to make a short film is it takes a long time to make a short film. It's difficult to make a short film. It's not hard in the sense of, you can do whatever you want. But if you want to make something, that's why I say, ask yourself why you want to do it. Oh, because I want to get a job. Oh, because I have an idea, and I think that the only way to make that idea is to do it in animation form. Or I love animation. I do it all the time. Now I want to do something that's a little bit longer form, that has a story. Or I really like to tell stories. Again, I think it's the best way to tell my story is to do it in animation form. Well, then you're probably on the right track. If you're trying to do something because you want to show off, and you want to have somebody discover you, or you want to make a lot of money, that's probably not going to happen. I'm just going to level with you. That's not what usually happens with short animated films. Millions and millions of people are making short animated films every day, and they're dedicating hours and hours of their lives to making these things and making them as good as they can because they love to do it. And so if you are doing it because you just love it, the idea of making short films, and you would do it regardless if I say yes or no, you should or shouldn't do it, then you're on the right path. I look at it this way. So, I mean, these are tips on how to make an animated short film, but I'll talk about more nuts and bolts details in just a second. But this is the way I look at it. Out here are all the people who ever had an idea. Inside of here, these are all the people who ever started their ideas. Inside of there are all the people who started but probably didn't finish. Inside of there are people who started and finished but never quite got to the goals that they wanted to with their films. And I've done a lot of short films like that. Inside of there are people who were successful. They did the film to their quality that they hoped for. The film was finished to the level that they thought. I'm going to have to zoom in for this next part, but you can get where I'm going. Inside of here, these are the people who actually got some notoriety or whatever. They got some money, they got some, they had some measure of success. And then right down inside of there, where you can barely fit anybody else, those are the people who got, successful. That's Steven Spielberg, right? Or Quentin Tarantino, or you just think of something, J.J. Abrams. People who, are just Orson Welles, the one-of-a-kind people, Walt Disney, J.K. Rowling, as a writer. These are people who got into there, and then it's a very lonely little group of people who got all that way. For the most part, most of us are going to find ourselves in these outer three circles. And that's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It's just go into it knowing exactly what you want out of it. And your success will depend on where you see yourself in that grand scheme of things. What will you consider a success? Is it, well, I just started the thing and that already is a win? Great. Well, then good. Is it, I got a lot further into the ring than most people get? Great. That's a win. It's just think about that before you start the process. There's nothing sadder to me than projects that get started and never finished. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. That doesn't mean it's a failure. It just means you want to train yourself to be one of those people who finish what you start. Those are the people who are successful in this world. So if that's what you're looking for, success, then those are kind of my parameters of it. Yours might be different, but that's kind of how a lot of us measure success. Were you successful on your own terms? In terms of how do you make a short film, the first thing that you want to start out with is your idea. And then you want to whittle that down into something concrete, whether it's a script or storyboards. And then you want to whittle that down into the technical aspects, like I've been talking about tonight. How detailed are my characters? How many characters do I have? What are their costumes? What are their, what's the playing field that the story's going to take place on? At some point, to back up, you really do have to storyboard if you want to do animation. You have to think in terms of, well, once upon a time there was a character, and then the character met another person, and they disagreed about how things should go, and so they got into some conflict or other and fought, and then somebody ended up winning and being victorious, and somebody went away because they lost. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4. There you go. That's a mini story. So you have to break it down like that into shots and scenes, and shots and scenes are based on the same way that we tell stories, which is once upon a time there was. Once upon a time, there were 3 little pigs, and each one of those pigs had an idea for a house. Well, all that has to be shown. There were 3 little pigs. They each wanted a house. And then you have to break it down into terms like that before you even start animating. Once you've broken it down into terms like that, assuming again that you want to make, I mean, even a live action film, I've made both and I've had success with both. At a certain point, then you have to go out and you have to start shooting those shots. So you have to actually make the thing happen and that's where a lot of people get hung up. That process goes on for a really long time. And then once you shot everything, you have to put it together, edit it into the proper form so that it plays as well as it can. And then you finish it off with post-production. That is fixing up the sound, adding music, plussing the color, and working at polishing the thing that you've created to its best possible form. So you can see there's a lot of steps. Now, nowadays, there's absolutely no excuse for people if they want to make a short film there's no excuse to not make the short film that you wanted to make. It couldn't be easier nowadays with the technology we have at our disposal. And so you really do owe it to yourself. If you have any interest in the subject matter whatsoever, that you should go out there and make your dang film. And don't listen to me when I say things like, oh, well, you shouldn't make it unless you're really convinced. I say those things to try and dissuade people who are just in it for reasons that don't really matter. For people who are just tossing ideas around. A lot of people say, I want to make a short film. Very few people are actually capable of pulling it off. And so when I say, well, it's really hard, don't even bother. Why would you want to do that? If that stops you and makes you not want to make a film anymore, then you weren't made to make a short film. The people who are going to end up making short films are very stubborn, and they're going to keep fighting against the odds and doing it regardless of what anyone says, regardless of whatever happens. When I was shooting live action films, I had cameras fall over, and I had a person nearly go to the hospital because he was allergic to animals, and I had an animal in the shooting location. I had another guy dislocated his shoulder. I had to take him to Cedars-Sinai and have them fix him up. And I've had film burn. I had 3 cameras broke on one of the films that I tried to make. We started calling it The Curse of Bob. That was the name of our film. Bob is dead. So you really have to be dedicated to making films. If that's something you're interested in, you're going to have to beat some odds. And that's why I created those concentric circles. Not everyone can do it. Be that person who can do it. Be that person who sees it to the end, even though it doesn't end up looking or seeming exactly like you thought. And keep doing it and keep doing it. And one day you'll be that person who was there at the right place at the right time. Mike Mitchell is somebody I started out with in the animation industry. He now directs animated films. He did Trolls. He did Shrek sequel. He did other things I worked with him on. I'm not a friend of his anymore. He's gone off and become famous in his own way. But I worked with him many, many years ago. He wouldn't know me if he saw me on the street. I actually worked for him on a film, and I never introduced myself because he wouldn't have recognized me. But I recognized him, and I watched his career, and he just shot film after film after film until he honed his craft, and then he started working as a director, and he's been doing it ever since. So yeah, go out and make it. That's the best tip I can offer. If you want to test your animation skills, as you say, then just keep doing things. See what I'm doing with this bat? This is an exercise. I have no designs on this ever being seen by anybody but myself and then you guys. I'm not entering it in contests. I'm not putting it on websites. When I have something that I think is nice, I will put it on a website, and I'll take the wrath of people piling on and telling me what they think of it. But something like this, I'm just doing it because I love it. I just do it for the joy. I mean, I'm also doing it to show people out there. I mean, I don't know that I would have done this if I wasn't streaming. But this was done for fun. And so just do stuff like that. Just keep animating because you love it. And then one of these days you're going to have something that's so good, it'll knock people's socks off. And you may end up like my friend who did Lucas the Spider, and who is now going to do a series because it was so good and got so many hits that they're going to make a show out of it. So right now I'm going to finish off today, I'm going to do some tones and highlights. I guess I'll do the tones first. The tones are supposed to look like shadows, and so I've got a brush. I chose an airbrush marker that's really soft, and turning the opacity down pretty nicely, and painting with a black color. So it'll look something like that. So I'm just going to kind of build up the black shading and just give this a real soft edge. So something like this. So that's a little bit too much. So I'll just keep lightening it up and making it more and more gray. A little darker gray than the color of the body, and it should look like a nice soft shadow. If I remember right, gray is 256 or something like that in terms of red, green, and blue. I'll go for that first. That's close, not quite. I'll keep going lighter than that. I don't remember what it is. We'll just go for a real black and then just lighten it up by hand. I'm just looking for a lighter and lighter gray color, and then I'll or I could just turn down the alpha, that'll do it too. So anyway, we just want a soft black color. I'll just keep trying things. There we go. That's maybe a little too light. And then I'm going to paint on top of the color that already exists, and then it'll look like it's got a little bit of a shadow to it. I could also paint with a gradient, that's something, but I don't like gradients. I don't like anything that's automatic. Anything that's meant to make your life easier probably isn't going to end up being a very nice tool. So I'll try painting this on the character a little bit, see, something like that. It's still a little dark. I'll just do it manually, knock it down. So that's a little bit more in the neighborhood of what I was going for. And then I'm going to just be real sloppy with it, mostly in the interest of time. But the idea is that I'm replicating what the shadow would look like on this character if it was standing in moonlight that's facing from the other direction. And I'll just do a couple of these, and then I'll do the highlights on the other side. So I really don't want to get too detailed with it, because I have to do this again and again and again on every single frame. So the more detail I add, the more room there is for it to be sloppy. So there you go. So there's what the shadow looks like. Yeah, Classics M87. I hope that answered your question. If it didn't, feel free to ask more. I'm happy to share, because I have made a lot of short films, live action ones, animated ones. I had my live action one went to a film fest in Italy. My 2D animated one, it played at the DreamWorks Film Festival for what it's worth. And I was pretty happy with it. People thought it was pretty funny, but you know, I would do short films all the time, but they're really time intensive and require a lot, and you just have to be so dedicated, and I just don't have it in me anymore between all my other responsibilities and duties. I don't, to be honest, I just don't have anything that I want to say in film. The last things I did were my shows, my live show musicals, and that really sated me. I really felt like, wow, I've really had the opportunity to do a lot of great stuff, and so why push it? My shows ended up wonderful. They exceeded my expectations, so why not just stop there and then give other people a chance? It looks like I biffed it. All right, so here we go, doing some more shadows, and then I'll do some highlights. And we're almost out of time. We got about 10 minutes left, so if there's anything, any burning questions you guys have, or any things that you want to hear more about, please feel free to offer it up before the time's out today. I also say too, you know, if you want to come back next time, if you got something that you want to see, if there's something you're specifically interested in, I have specific things that I work on when I'm doing this, because they're just projects that I'm comfortable working on while I'm talking live. But if there's anything you want to know a little bit more about, don't hesitate if you want to come back sometime. I try to accommodate requests. So anyway, that's what the black shadow looks like. Now I'm going to lay in a white one. So we'll see if that looks good. So it's a little bright right now, so I probably would lower the alpha on that. So I wanted it to look like the moon shining on the fur, whatever it is the bat's got. Something like that, but it's a little dark, so I'll bring down the alpha. I would do this on another pass. I would do all the shadows first, and then I'd go and do the highlights after. And then I would, spend some serious time making sure that they looked the same thickness and that everything matches up nicely. But a little bit of highlight on the nose, probably a little bit of highlight on the eyes. I think I did the eyes separately because for the eyes, I bumped the alpha all the way up, and then I made specific dots, little small dots, not like this. As you can see, this just looks a little bit too much. It's a little too gossamer. So to do the highlights, I wanted just a soft edge, and then the highlights for the eyes I did on a separate pass. The problem with this is that it's actually going into the actual color. So if I want to go in and make any changes with this, let's say I want to go in and erase, so you can see, well, no, that's actually, it worked. Well, it's because I'm doing it on the line layer, which is wrong. And if you do it properly, if you do it on the color layer, then you're erasing the color along with it. So it's not perfect, and there are other ways to do this, but if you were really going to do it for real, you would probably, like I said, draw specifically on the layer itself. So I would draw a color separation. Let's pick a better color, like red or something, and go in there and just specifically make that the color. And then when I went to paint it, and paint it with a different, let's find some contrasty green, go in and paint it, then there's going to be a nice solid line there that I can really make a color separation and not use that airbrush, and then be very specific and animate it that way. I would not probably go in and just touch it up. This is actually how they used to do it in the olden days, the 30s and 40s at Disney, is they would have ink and painters go in with stipple brushes and paint on top of the cells, which would be, again, it's kind of dangerous if you're afraid that you're going to mess up the color. But they would do it on the top of the cell, and they would do things like, cheeks. They would add like a little bit of a color to the cheeks for Snow White and things like that. And that would give it a softness, but it also got real shimmery, so we don't do stuff like that anymore. Hey JDs, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate you hanging out, and you have a good one too. Nice hearing from you. All right, so that's what I would do to do the tones and highlights. So now, once again, to finish off today, I will show you the final product. This is how the thing looked as a result of all these endless hours of work. I also went in and painted the background a little so it highlights the center of action where the character is actually moving around. But this is what the final effect was the bat with tones and with highlights, with a cleanup line, with a paint line, with different colors for the wings, different colors for different parts. If I slow this down and look at it a little bit more slowly, you can see some of the work that went into it. I made sure that the highlights were always on the left, the white highlights, and then the dark shadows were always on the right, so it looks like the moon's coming in. I also painted it so that it looks like the moon's coming in the window a little bit, unlike here where you can see it's all just kind of flat. Went through frame by frame and added highlights and added tones, and then the last thing I did was I added little highlights on the eyes themselves, gave them a little touch of white inside the pupils so that you could actually see that the eyes have kind of a dimension to them. And again, the idea of adding all those tones and highlights was to make it look a little bit more solid, a little more dimensional. If I was really serious, I think I probably would have added shadows on the ground. But honestly, I looked at this with the tones and highlights and I went, this is about as far as this is going to go. I don't see any point in shining this up and dressing this up. I'll leave you with these thoughts for the evening, which is, understanding that not everything you do is going to be a knock it out of the park. Thank you, Classics AM 87. I appreciate that you, again, compliments are always welcome, but not everything you do either can or should be A+. Chuck Jones said you have 100,000 terrible drawings in you, so go ahead and get rid of 99. Get rid of a lot of them beforehand, so that and he even said, he's like, so neither you nor we have to ever deal with them. Just the sooner you get to drawing, you'll get all those drawings out of your system, and everything you do after that will be perfection, right? Well, maybe not, but the point is well taken, which is don't worry about hitting it out of the park every single time. You have to practice a lot and do a lot of things in stages. And so don't put pressure on yourself to always be excellent. Go out there, act as if every single thing you're ever going to do is going to be the best thing you ever did. But at the end of the day, understand that you're going to have to, no matter what you like to do, you're going to have to do a lot of flops before you actually get a success. And everybody has had to go through this process. Don't think for a moment that that's not the case. I told this story about 1,000 times about Tim Burton's first film, which was not Frankenweenie or Vincent, but was this beach party thing. And it wasn't good. I mean, I've seen it. It's just, I have friends who were in it, and it just wasn't good. And so allow yourself to make a lot of mistakes and practice and try things and understand that you're not going for the goal of perfection as much as you're going for the goal of evolving and getting better and better and becoming somebody who is talented and the result of loving what you do and doing what you love. And then and only then will you someday find yourself looking around and going, hey, wait a minute, I'm actually kind of good at this stuff. And oh, they actually paid me to do this, if that's one of your goals. And then next thing you might find yourself looking at a group of students and teaching them how to do it because you've reached a certain place where they trust and respect that you know how to teach this stuff. So again, speaking of teaching, so that's me and the bat. For this week, we shall not see It's Like again. If you want to see how that all came together, this is the last stream I'm going to be doing this bat. On to the next thing. I'll probably go back to the wizard next week, or maybe something else. Who knows? Turn in and see. But that is it for me and Mr. Bat, or Miss Bat, or whatever it is. So yes, next week I'll move into another project. Thanks, Sherry. Thank you, and thanks for watching. Next week we'll move on to another assignment. I hope you guys have enjoyed hanging out with me today or tonight, whichever it is for you, wherever you're at. I've certainly enjoyed hanging out with you, and it's been fun, and I appreciate your comments and suggestions and conversation. And again, tune in next time. I'm here every week at this time, whatever time it ends up being for you, for 2 hours. I'll bring whatever its name is again. I'll bring this for next week. I was going to have a turkey, but I don't think that's going to work for Thanksgiving. I don't have the resources for that, but I got Santa coming to join us. But for next week, we'll have my friend here again. But that's me signing off for another CG Spectrum stream. If you are interested in CG Spectrum, I urge you to check out cgspectrum.com and check out what they have to offer as far as classes. Check out what they have to offer as far as free streams and information. Everybody that teaches there is somebody who's worked in the industry and has a lot of experience and was happy to share their knowledge with you, whether it's classes or streams in a wide variety of different disciplines. So check it out, have fun, keep doing what you love to do and doing what you love, and maybe we'll talk to you again in the near future. But that's it for me, signing off. Have a great rest of the day or night and a great week, and be safe and sane. All right, see you later.